My investigations, one topic that initially interested me the most was the amount of vaccine education that a typical medical doctor, especially a pediatrician, receives when he or she is in medical school. Here's what the experts had to say.
Vaccines were not very much discussed in medical school, other than this is what vaccines do. They save lives, they protect people from disease, and this is the schedule you need to use in your pediatric clinics to give to kids. Started medical school in 1983, and it wasn't until 1998 that a mother came over to me and said, "Dr. Larry, did you know that there's mercury in vaccines?" And I said, "No." And instead of just pushing it aside and saying, it's just such a small amount, it doesn't matter, I actually started looking to see what else is in vaccines. And I realized that there's a great amount of material in vaccines that impairs many cell structures and cell functions.
I really didn't think about vaccines very much throughout my career because I don't know if you know this, but medical doctors really aren't taught anything about what's in vaccines or the contents or the problems that can happen after vaccination. We're basically given a sheet of paper during a pediatric rotation and told this is the schedule and to keep up with it. And so the thinking there is, oh, I just got to make sure that everybody's got the ones that they need and which ones they need, and not really critically thinking about it at all. I used to think it was just me because I was an adult internist, but when you look at people like Dr. Larry Pilevsky and Dr. Tony Bark, who actually specialized in pediatrics, and you hear the same thing from them, then you realize that medical schools are not providing this information, and there's no incentive to go and look. There's not a lot of time during residency, so unless something's really a problem, you're not going to go trying to disprove a well-proven theory or practice. Nobody does it.
I've got a daughter in medical school and a really good friend in medical school, and I've asked them, because they're already being taught vaccines are safe and effective, and they're the best thing you can do to further the health of the population. They're already being taught this. And I was never taught when I was in medical school 30 years ago what was in a vaccine. We were only taught that they're wonderful and do them. So no, most doctors trained today have no idea what's in the vaccines.
When I went to medical school, I graduated in 1985, and at that period of time, when I went on into practice, there were only 3 vaccines really that were used in children. There was DPT, MMR, and polio. And it wasn't until 1991 when there was the big ramp up of the vaccine schedule, starting with the hepatitis B vaccine at birth, and then they added the Hib, and then chickenpox and Prevnar, and now we have 46 doses of 16 vaccines that are given to children by the time they're 5 years of age. So I would say that when I was in medical school, there wasn't much to talk about. There was only the 3 vaccines. But then we had this big ramp up, so anybody who's graduated from medical school and gone through a residency program from 1991 forward, which has been 25 years, the only thing that they're told is here's the schedule and here's how you give it, and you really need to deal with those parents who are doing this whole thing called vaccine hesitancy now.
Dr. Tenpenny just mentioned a term that you may have heard before, vaccine hesitancy. We'll get to that in a moment, but first I want to address the apparent lack of vaccine education that most doctors receive while in medical school. Perhaps things have changed since Dr. Pilevsky and Dr. Tenpenny and Dr. Humphreys attended medical school. I wanted to get an idea of the current courses that a typical medical school student would take while they're at a school like, say, Harvard. The first year includes the following 13 total courses.
Introduction to the profession, the molecular and cellular basis of medicine, the human body, human genetics, patient doctor 1, introduction to social medicine and global health, clinical epidemiology and population health, introduction to healthcare policy, scholarship in medicine, physician and community, integrated human physiology, immunology, microbiology and pathology, and medical ethics and professionalism.
It appears that whatever is taught about vaccines and vaccination in Harvard's 5-year curriculum is done with one course: immunology, microbiology, and pathology. If you search through the curriculum of dozens of other medical schools in the United States, you'll find that there is not much variation from Harvard. Apparently, vaccines and vaccination are simply not featured prominently.
My name is Dr. Lawrence Pilevsky. I'm a pediatrician, originally trained at NYU School of Medicine, graduated in 1987, finished my residency at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York in 1990, and did a fellowship at the Bellevue Hospital in the outpatient department. The first 9 years of my career were spent in ERs, running an intensive care unit, working in a neonatal intensive care unit, working inpatient in the hospital, working in a clinic, and then eventually having a private practice. In 1983, when I started medical school, I was taught vaccines were safe and they were effective and give them. But I was not taught about any of the science around their safety or any of the studies around how safety were done. And it wasn't until 1998 that a mother came up to me and said, Dr. Larry, did you know that there's mercury in vaccines? And I said, no, I did not. And as a medical student, I was trained to critically think. If you see an observation, you go after it and try and figure out if there's a question to ask. So instead of just ignoring it, I looked further into the vaccine ingredients. And I found that there were a number of vaccine ingredients that in animal studies were proven to be very dangerous to animals. And I didn't understand why these same ingredients were actually in vaccines. I was starting to hear stories from parents, not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands of stories from parents who took a very healthy child into their doctor's office and then found that their child lost much of their health, whether it was their speech, whether it was seizures, whether it was death, whether it was asthma, allergies, eczema, whether it was autism, whether it was learning disabilities, whether it was inflammatory bowel disease, autoimmune diseases. And every one of those parents were told it had nothing to do with the vaccine. Every single one. And this continues today. But yet, when I look at the ingredients that are in the vaccines, I have the science to actually explain how these medical problems could be happening in these children.
אני מניחה שרוב הרופאים מאמינים שהם לטובתנו. כשמדברים איתנו על קונסנזוס, אוקיי? הרוב חושבים שהם לטובתנו. כי הם ניזונים בדיוק מאותה תעמולה, ראיתם את האיור הקודם, אבל הם רואים גם את זה. הם רואים גם את זה, מתייחסים, בבקשה. אתם רואים? מנסים להזריק לעובדות, לבורה הזאת שהילדים שלה ירוקים ממחלות, כי היא לא מחסנת אותם. זה מה שגם הרופאים שלנו רואים, וזה מה שהם חושבים עלינו, כי זה המידע שהם מקבלים. אבל בפועל, מה שהם יודעים על חיסונים, זה כלום ושום דבר, ברובם. וכאן אני מצטטת את החבר'ה משווקי החיסונים הגדולים בישראל, קבוצת מדברים על חיסונים, החבר'ה של מדעת, הפרוטוקולים של הוועדה למחלות זיהומיות וחיסונים. רופאי הילדים לא תמיד יודעים מספיק על חיסונים. וואלה. כמו שאמרתי, אל תסמכו עליי, אבל גם אל תסמכו על הרופא שלכם. לכו תבדקו בעצמכם.
This is essentially all that your pediatricians know about vaccines. I'm serious. It takes up about 1 page in their entire textbook. They are taught that vaccines are safe and effective. They are taught that vaccine injury is rare and that the science is settled. That's it. I mean, aside from you poke the needle here, there may be some swelling, they really don't know much more than that. If you ask them, what are the ingredients in a vaccine? They can't tell you. If you ask them how the immune system works, they don't really know. I'm not an immunologist. Well then, so how are the macrophage involved, the white blood cells? What about cytokines in the brain? Have you ever heard of a cytokine storm? No idea. No idea, that's not what they do. So we should think about that. I asked my pediatrician, what are the ingredients in a vaccine? I don't know. Let's be clear. I was holding you on a pedestal because you had 8 years of an education and somehow you're supposed to be smarter than me. And when I just ask you the ingredients in a product, it's about all you do. You weigh my child, you measure their head, and you give them vaccines. 16 vaccines in 72 doses, and you can't recite every ingredient in that vaccine? Some of our pediatricians have been doing this for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And then they say, you challenge me. I'm going to kick you out of my practice. You dare to challenge me, we're not going to allow you in school. Hold on a second, I'm not challenging you, I'm asking what you know. Because if I go down the street to my restaurant, local restaurant, and I say I have a food allergy, there's a waiter there that doesn't even have a college education, may never go to college, but they can recite every ingredient in every single dish on a menu that has 100 different things on it. I don't think it's asking too much that our pediatricians step up their game a little bit, just a little bit, you know? How about look at what's in it, read the ingredients, know what they are, explain to me why there's human DNA from aborted babies in the vaccine, what's it needed for? And what are the possible side effects that could happen from that? Why do we need aluminum? Do you know how much aluminum's in it? Did you know the flu shot has mercury in it? Why do you think it's okay to put mercury into a pregnant woman? All good questions. And we're being told we can't ask any of them.
It's what is so sad with all the stories that you recalled here is the same thing when we take our children back to our doctors and say, look, he's had a seizure, look, he's sick, or you know, something's wrong.
Yes.
And just following the vaccine, all of them say the same thing. It's not, they don't listen. It's not the vaccine, so we're now going to put your child through a whole load of unnecessary tests.
Yes.
And our children off they go to psychologists, psychiatrists, or anywhere but the vaccines. It's just, no, not the vaccine. They don't, it's like they've been told to say. Why would you not say, okay, let me see why?
So, I think you need some humility on the part of physicians. First of all, physicians have not been trained that vaccine injuries could be this great. And secondly, I wish more of my physician colleagues were humble enough to say, well, let me look into this, as opposed to, no, it couldn't be, from the immediate reaction.
Science is not taking place here. Fraud is taking place. And we've got to get back to science. We've got to get back to demanding science take place. When, what I find fascinating when I question, doctors and pediatricians that are involved in this, and you're within a minute and a half, you realize that their entire understanding of vaccines is just because they told me so, just because they said it was safe. It's safe because they told me it was. Well, do you understand how a vaccine works? Well, I know how to give a vaccine. No, but do you know how it works? Do you understand that it's not going through safety testing? Do you realize it's not categorized, a vaccine is not categorized like a pharmaceutical drug, that it doesn't have to go through the same safety tests that's being rushed down the market? Well, no, but I mean, it's safe. And they just keep repeating this line. You're like, oh my God. Well, these poor doctors really, in a way, have spent a fortune on an education that has robbed them of actual information. And so you realize this fraud and this mantra of vaccines are safe. Vaccines are safe. They're safe. They're safe. They're efficacious. I mean, it's just not true.
We have what we call throwaway journals for pediatricians. So there's an infectious disease journal. I mean, if you look at all the ads in it, it clearly comes from, it's supported by pharma, but it's very well written. I mean, it looks good. It's glossy, and it comes across your desk weekly. And you read, pretty much almost every copy of that will have something that's elevating vaccines and putting down, any possible connection, right? Putting down Wakefield as a, fraud, and they would just repeat that. So you read that over and over again. I'm sort of reminded of weapons of mass destruction, and off we went to war. I mean, you hear it enough times, you start thinking it must be so.
I've been studying vaccines for close to 17 years. I'm not really here to speak against or for vaccines. I am for the legislation. What I'm here to speak about is for science. And I think in all of this discussion, what I'm hearing is an attempt to get you legislators to pay attention to science. And I'm advising you and asking you to look at the science and not at the rhetoric. You have a very difficult task, which I empathize with, which is you have to try to make sense of the very august and respected institutions represented by pediatrics, the Department of Health, which are advising you that these medical interventions are safe and effective. Unfortunately, if you look at the science, you will not find the evidence to support those conclusions. Please look at the evidence The days of Marcus Welby are over. We cannot just listen and take what our doctors say with blind faith anymore. And please don't do that. Don't listen to what you hear in this room today, except that it might inspire you to learn on your own what the truth is about vaccines. Part of the truth that you will learn is that much of the outcomes have not been researched. We do not know the long-term effects of vaccination because they have not been researched. Why not? I think you can guess why not. How interested are the vaccine companies in finding out the answers to those questions? What independent research will be funded that will answer those questions? There has been some research done which indicates that those cohorts of children who have been fully vaccinated have a higher incidence of chronic illness than those cohorts that do not. This does not diminish the value of the vaccine in reducing the incidence of infectious disease. However, we are reducing the incidence of infectious disease with one stroke and increasing the incidence of chronic illness on the other. This is science. I'm not making this up. Okay? So when I was in medical school, I was taught, don't talk about the bad side effects. You're going to scare the patient. If that's what you want your doctors to do, you should believe the doctors in the room who have told you there are no serious side effects.
Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, I just have a quick question. You said you're into the science aspect of the the medical practice. Are you an MD or are you a scientist? Or?
I'm an MD.
You're an MD?
Yes.
And you specialize in the science of the medicine? Is that what it is?
Well, I would like to think all of us doctors go to the science, advise people based on science. In our medical training, we actually do not get training on the science of vaccination. That is not part of medical training.
Oh, okay.
And those people who say, and there have been people who said this, you should trust the doctors. They have the training. They have not received training in vaccination. That is not done in medical school or residency. And I would ask you to find a pediatrician who says they've been well educated in the science of vaccines. They aren't.
Would assume that our Department of Health, there are certain vaccinations that, that we want our children to have that would be required.
I ask people to investigate each and every vaccine on its own merits. My own pediatrician, for my own children, he has allowed my children not to be vaccinated above and beyond what my wife had asked, but he says that he assumes that the CDC and the health department would not be recommending these vaccines if they were not safe and effective. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, if you look at the evidence, you will find that assumption to be unwarranted. Do the research. You will find the evidence does not support that assumption. It's nice in Marcus Welby world to believe that it is warranted. It is not warranted. The CDC has been shown to be extremely corrupt, and much of the research was done. Researchers were paid to find certain outcomes that the CDC wanted, and when the outcomes weren't obtained, they suppressed that data. It's really outrageous how far we've come from science with this. Follow the science. Don't believe what I'm saying or anybody else. Follow the science.
Thank you, Doctor.
Any other questions of the committee?
I know how medical establishment is operating, and that doctors have to follow certain protocols. And if they were to understand that if they follow these protocols and they harm people, it would be very hard for them as humans to do that. So the establishment is making everything possible to prevent doctors from realizing that what they're doing might be harmful. Therefore, you have these studies that seemingly deny what is obvious to the eye.
My articles could not be published because we rejected this. The editor doesn't even send the article out for review. The editors is not specialists. The peer reviewers are the specialists. Basically, when customarily, when you send an article and manuscript to a journal, the editors look at the journal, look at your manuscript. The editor look at the manuscript, and then refer to the experts. That's called peer reviewers. The peer reviewers are the experts. But they stop at the editorial level. They don't send the manuscript out for peer review. That is the problem. Then even in one article, the first article I tried to publish the HPV DNA in the vaccine, the editor sent out for peer review, and all 3 peer reviewers say this manuscript could be or should be reported, should be published. And then after the agreement for publication, the editor find a reason to reject it. This editorial censorship.
Number one thing, it saved my career, is I had parents come to me and say, Dr. Thomas, have you looked at this article? Have you read about this? Have you thought about that? And physicians who know it all, right, are not interested. So you're probably not going to get through to some physicians who just aren't open to getting any advice or knowledge from somebody who's not a doctor. But I am so grateful to the various patients who came to me and said, well, the very first one was a gal who's an attorney here in town. She had a couple boys who were doing quite well. They were a little quirky, but they were doing okay. And she said, you know, there's this conference coming into town, Defeat Autism Now. This was back in 2002 or 2003. He said, would you just go and let me know what you think? And I had heard about them, and in my world it was like, oh, those are a bunch of kooks. Do not go to those conferences. They're nonsense. But I went out of curiosity. Why would this attorney be that curious about it? Blew my mind. The level of science in that organization, the articles that were presented, I'd never been to such a scientific conference. And it was like an eye-opener for me, right? And then I'll have patients bring an article and say, you know, have you seen this article? And usually I hadn't. But I would take it, and eventually I would get to it, and it's like, wow, you know, when you start reading things that aren't on your radar, because physicians are isolated. We're really a product of a system that has trained us to think a certain way. And when we're in that system, we think it's the best. And we think it's the only right system. And all the rest of you guys out there, you know, whether you're an alternative care provider or you're just a parent, what could you possibly know? Well, a lot. There is so much information out there that, you know, parents, the frustration that parents have is that nobody's listening. Right? The media isn't listening. They're not picking up their stories. Their doctors aren't listening. They're not looking into it, right? And so I've been educated by my patients more times than I want to admit it. But because of that, I'm a better doctor, because I've learned things that I wouldn't have learned if I'd stayed with my blinders on.
It's time for doctors to be brave. It's time for doctors to speak up. It's time for doctors to admit their mistakes. I understand it's hard to admit that you were wrong, but we need to follow the example of Dr. Paul Thomas and the other doctors who are starting to speak up, because more and more doctors are speaking out, and we have to do that. There have been so many times in medical history, in recent medical history, when doctors were implicated in making mistakes, and it was the brave ones who came forward who said, we recommended this and we shouldn't have, and we're going to stop recommending it. And we've got to do that now with vaccines. And yes, we're in the midst of a sea change, because too many children have been damaged by too many toxins, and parents are smart and they're starting to wake up, and it's time to end the damage. It's time to end the autism epidemic. It's time to end the autoimmune disorders. Sick is the new normal in the United States, and that is not acceptable, and no doctor should accept that either.
At the end of the day, the doctor, the physician, they're just trying to help. Part of it is why it brings me to tears when I think about it, is because, you know, it's just, I mean, rationally you can objectify. I didn't know any better. I mean, there's no question, but it still caused harm. I really did not know, and I failed miserably on my responsibility of doing my due diligence on, you know, selecting a therapy that I believed would have more benefit, and in reality, I just did not do my homework.